The morning fog hung low over Main Street in Hyannis as they emerged from the mist, 6 massive German shepherds moving with military precision, their muscular bodies tensed and relaxed in perfect synchronization, dark eyes alert and focused forward. No leashes, no harnesses, just raw power and motion commanded by someone. The gathering crowd strained to see who controlled these magnificent beasts. Then gasps rippled through the onlookers. It wasn't a professional trainer or police officer guiding this formidable pack. It was a child, a tiny slip of a girl no more than 6 years old. Her delicate frame seemed impossibly small next to the powerful animals, yet they flanked her protectively, responding to commands so subtle they were nearly invisible. With just a whispered word or slight gesture of her small hand, the dogs would halt, turn, or proceed in perfect unison. "Something's not right about that," muttered Eleanor Peterson, narrowing her eyes as she watched the spectacle. "No child could control those monsters naturally. Mark my words, there's something very wrong happening in that house." Little did anyone know that Eleanor's suspicions would unleash a chain of events that would expose secrets darker and more extraordinary than anyone in Hyannis could have imagined. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Emma Thompson wasn't always the silent child who commanded German shepherds with the subtlest of gestures. Born to Mark and Sarah Thompson, renowned dog trainers who worked with police departments across New England, Emma's early years were filled with the joyful chaos of a home where dogs were family. Her parents recognized Emma's unique gift when, at just 3 years old, she could calm their most temperamental rescue dog with nothing more than a gentle touch. The Thompsons' world shattered on a rainy October evening in 2019 when a pickup truck ran a red light, ending their lives instantly and leaving Emma physically unharmed but emotionally devastated. The trauma manifested as selective mutism. Emma simply stopped speaking to people, retreating into a world where only the dogs could hear her whispers. Doctors diagnosed mild autism, explaining her intense focus on the animals and inability to reconnect with humans. Life with her grandparents Robert and Martha Thompson, in their weathered Cape Cod house in Hyannis, became Emma's new normal. At 74 and 72 respectively, the elderly couple faced the dual challenge of raising a traumatized 6-year-old while managing 6 highly trained German shepherds, Max, Bella, Duke, Luna, Shadow, and Rex. Robert's heart condition and Martha's arthritis made it nearly impossible to walk the energetic dogs, whose training would deteriorate without regular exercise and discipline. Her fixed income stretched thin, covering food for the pack and Emma's special therapy sessions that seemed to yield little progress. Yet they refused to separate the child from the last connection to her parents, recognizing that the dogs provided comfort no human could offer. Behind the peeling blue door of the Thompson home, a remarkable relationship developed. Emma discovered her parents' detailed training journals hidden in the attic, filled with commands, techniques, and personal notes about each dog's personality. But night after night, the child studied these volumes by flashlight, absorbing the wisdom of her parents posthumously. She developed a language of subtle hand signals, soft whistles, and gentle touches that the dogs responded to with extraordinary precision. When Martha's back pain became too severe to manage the daily walks, Emma made a silent decision. One morning she simply clipped each dog's leash to her belt, led them down the porch steps, and embarked on the journey that would soon captivate and divide their small coastal town. The first time Emma walked her dogs alone through downtown Hyannis, the sight stopped traffic literally. Cars slowed to a crawl as drivers craned their necks to witness the improbable procession. The 6 German shepherds moved as a coordinated unit, with Max, the largest at nearly 90 pounds, taking point position. Emma, barely visible among the mass of fur and muscle, walked with quiet determination, her red sneakers peeking out beneath the forest of canine legs. Initially she kept the side streets in the park, but as her confidence grew, so did her routes. By the 3rd week she had established a morning ritual that took her down Main Street just as shops were opening, drawing crowds of admirers who began setting their watches by her appearances. "Would you look at that?" marveled Frank Delaney, the owner of the hardware store, speaking to no one in particular as he paused while unlocking his shop. Those dogs mind that little girl better than my teenagers mind me. He wasn't alone in his assessment. Smartphones captured videos that circulated among local residents, showing Emma guiding her pack through increasingly complex maneuvers. A slight gesture from her small hand would send 3 dogs left, 3 right, reuniting at the corner without tangling or missing a beat. When she paused at crosswalks, the dogs formed a protective semicircle around her, their attentiveness unwavering until she gave permission to proceed. The positive reactions initially outweighed concerns. Tourists asked to take pictures with Hyannis Dog Whisperer, though Emma rarely acknowledged these requests, focusing instead on her animals. Local business owners put water bowls outside their shops, and Officer James Connolly, who initially followed at a distance to ensure public safety, it eventually became Emma's informal escort, marveling at the control she exhibited. In 20 years on the force, I've never seen K9 units this disciplined, he told his colleagues at the station. Whatever that kid's doing, we should be taking notes. The local bakery began saving bone-shaped treats for Emma's pack, and the owners of Cape Cod Coffee started preparing hot chocolate for Emma, though her grandmother usually collected it later, explaining with an apologetic smile that Emma doesn't take things from strangers. Eleanor Peterson watched this growing celebrity with mounting unease from behind the Venetian blinds of her Victorian home on Elm Street. As a retired elementary school principal and self-appointed guardian of community standards, Mrs. Peterson considered herself uniquely qualified to identify situations that just weren't right. She began timing Emma's walks, noting that the child appeared entirely unsupervised for approximately 45 minutes each morning. Where are her grandparents? She demanded of her husband, who had long ago learned that such questions required no answer. Those dogs could turn on her or someone else in an instant. It's negligence, plain and simple. Mrs. Peterson's concerns found fertile ground among a small but vocal segment of Hyannis residents. Margaret Wilson, whose poodle had once been frightened by one of Emma's shepherds, though no contact had occurred, began crossing the street whenever she saw them approach. The PTA president questioned whether Emma was even enrolled in school, sparking rumors about educational neglect. When Emma failed to appear at the town's annual Easter egg hunt, whispers of strange and disturbed began to circulate. Mrs. Peterson capitalized on these murmurs, organizing what she called concerned citizens' coffee hours on her wraparound porch, where the conversation inevitably turned to the dog girl and her elderly grandparents who clearly couldn't manage. The community's division became evident at the May Town Council meeting. The agenda item was ostensibly about leash laws in the downtown business district, but everyone knew the real subject was Emma Thompson. The meeting room in the historic town hall overflowed, forcing latecomers to stand along the walls and in the hallway beyond. Mayor Williams, sensing the tension, attempted to maintain order as speakers approached the microphone. I've been running my restaurant on Main Street for 15 years, stated Michael Gallagher, rolling up his sleeves to reveal forearms covered in tattoos. Those dogs bring in customers. People come to eat on my patio hoping to see them pass by. They're better behaved than most humans in this room. Applause erupted from one side of the chamber. Diane Fuller, clutching her designer purse, countered with trembling indignation. My grandson is terrified of dogs after being bitten last year. Should he have to encounter 6'6" massive unleashed animals on his way to the library? What about his rights? Equal applause followed from the opposite side. For over 2 hours, residents debated, their comments revealing less about leash regulations and more about deep-seated beliefs regarding parenting, safety, tradition, and change. Veterinarian Tom Stanley cited research on German Shepherds' intelligence and trainability. Insurance agent Patricia Moore countered with liability statistics. The ordinance remained unchanged, but the battle lines were drawn. The following Sunday, Pastor Richards of First Baptist Church delivered a sermon about fear of the different among us, without explicitly mentioning Emma. Down at St. Mary's Catholic Church, Father Donovan spoke of protecting the most vulnerable, equally avoiding direct reference. The Hyannis Oracle newspaper published opposing editorials, and the comment sections became battlegrounds. At Seaside Elementary, where Emma should have been attending first grade, children played Emma and the dogs at recess, arguing over who got to be Emma. Through it all, Emma herself remained seemingly oblivious, continuing her silent communication with the only family she fully recognized, unaware that her small figure had become the center of a growing storm that would soon break over the Thompson household with unexpected consequences for everyone involved. Each morning she moved through the increasingly divided town like a ghost, visible to all but connecting with none, her eyes focused only on her canine companions and the path ahead. Eleanor Peterson had never considered herself a crusader until now. Sitting at her antique writing desk, she carefully pinned another signature on her self-drafted petition for the safety of Emma Thompson and the community of Hyannis. Her handwriting, perfected through decades of grading elementary school papers, formed each letter with deliberate precision. 27 signatures, so far respectable but not enough. She needed to present an overwhelming mandate to the authorities if they were to take action. Charles, she called to her husband, who was attempting to enjoy his morning crossword. I need you to take me to the senior center after lunch. Betty Jackson promised to introduce me to her bridge club. Charles Peterson lowered his newspaper with a sigh. After 46 years of marriage, he recognized the futile battle against his wife's determination. Eleanor, don't you think you might be overstepping? That Thompson child hasn't caused any actual problems. Eleanor's spine stiffened. Not yet, Charles. Not yet. Do we wait until one of those beasts mauls a toddler? Until that poor disturbed girl is injured? Those elderly grandparents are clearly overwhelmed. It's neglect pure and simple, and if no one else will protect that child, I certainly will. By week's end, Eleanor's campaign had gathered momentum. Her petition circulated through church groups, beauty salons, and the country club. She recruited Margaret Wilson and Diane Fuller as her lieutenants, establishing a phone tree to alert supporters of Emma's walking schedule. They followed at a distance, documenting every instance when a dog moved more than 3 feet from Emma, every time the child crossed the street without looking both ways, and the occasional moments when one of the shepherds growled at another passing dog. Eleanor's masterstroke came at the Rotary Club luncheon, where she stood during the open comment period. Her friends and neighbors, she began, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she'd perfected during school assemblies. We have a situation in our town that demands immediate attention. She outlined what she described as a tragedy waiting to happen, painting a picture of endangerment so compelling that Bernard Whitaker, the club president and owner of 3 local insurance agencies, pledged his support on the spot. My company wouldn't insure a household with that liability risk, he declared, passing Eleanor's petition to the next table. I'll call my cousin at Child Services this afternoon. Eleanor's campaign found its most powerful ally in Councilwoman Victoria Harrington, who had narrowly lost the mayoral race to Williams the previous year. Recognizing political opportunity, Harrington publicly praised the concerned citizens bringing this important issue to light, and promised to review all relevant ordinances. The subtext was clear: Mayor Williams had failed to protect the community by not enforcing existing regulations. Not everyone succumbed to Eleanor's persuasion. Officer Connolly refused to sign, stating he'd observed no violations. Dr. Stanley, the veterinarian, wrote a letter to the Hyannis Oracle defending Emma's handling of the dogs. The bakery and coffee shop owners displayed "We Support Emma" signs in their windows. But these voices of support were increasingly drowned out as Eleanor's methodical campaign gained traction. On a warm Tuesday morning, Eleanor's efforts bore fruit in an unexpected way. Jonathan Pierce, a journalist from the regional newspaper who had been visiting his mother in Hyannis, witnessed Emma's procession and immediately recognized the human interest story with viral potential. His article, "The Dog Whisperer Child, Miracle or Menace," appeared online that evening, complete with surreptitiously taken photographs of Emma and quotes from concerned community leader Eleanor Peterson. The story exploded beyond Hyannis. By Wednesday, national morning shows were leading with the story. "Is this extraordinary child gifted or endangered?" asked one chipper host. Coming up next, the 6-year-old commanding 6 unleashed German Shepherds through a Massachusetts town. Social media amplified the story further. The hashtag #DogWhispererChild trended nationwide. A video compilation of Emma walking her dogs garnered millions of views. Online petitions emerged on both sides, one demanding intervention to protect Emma, another defending her right to maintain her connection with the animals. Animal behaviorists offered contradictory opinions without ever meeting Emma or her dogs. Child psychologists speculated about trauma responses and attachment disorders based solely on photographs. For the Thompson household, this sudden notoriety proved overwhelming. Reporters camped at the end of their driveway. Strangers knocked on their door at all hours. Robert Thompson suffered heart palpitations from the stress, requiring a brief hospitalization. Martha changed their phone number after receiving both threatening and supportive calls from across the country. And through it all, Emma retreated further into silence, now refusing to leave the house except in the pre-dawn hours to walk the increasingly agitated dogs. The national attention forced local authorities to respond. Mayor Williams, caught between competing constituencies, called an emergency meeting with the police chief, town attorney, and representatives from both the Department of Children and Families and Animal Control. The resulting press conference held on the steps of Town Hall drew media from Boston and Providence. The town of Yanna takes the safety and welfare of all our citizens seriously, the mayor announced, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool breeze. We have initiated a formal investigation into the situation regarding Emma Thompson and will follow established protocols to determine appropriate action. The deliberately vague statement satisfied no one. Eleanor Peterson, standing prominently behind the press contingent, loudly proclaimed it too little, too late. Emma's supporters booed when the animal control officer mentioned a safety assessment of the canines. Online commentators parsed every word for hidden meaning, and cable news pundits debated the implications for parental rights, child welfare policies, and even Americans with Disabilities Act protections. As the sun set that evening, a black sedan with government plates pulled into the Thompsons' driveway. Martha, watching from behind lace curtains, clutched her husband's hand as caseworker Melissa Rodriguez from DCF and Officer Brett Jameson from Animal Control approached their door. Emma, sensing her grandparents' distress, moved closer to Max, burying her small fingers in his thick fur. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, caseworker Rodriguez began after introductions, her voice professionally neutral. We're here to conduct an initial assessment regarding concerns that have been raised about your granddaughter's welfare and the management of your dogs. Robert Thompson, his voice shaking slightly, invited them to sit in the modest living room. Emma is a special child, he explained as the 6 German Shepherds arranged themselves protectively around the silent girl. After her parents died, these dogs became her way of staying connected to them. Officer Jameson eyed the animals warily. Answer, regardless of emotional attachment, there are safety protocols that must be followed. 6 dogs of this size and power each trailed off as Max, the largest shepherd, fixed him with an unwavering stare. We understand your concerns, Martha interjected, her arthritis-swollen hands folded in her lap. But these dogs saved Emma. After the accident, she wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. The dogs reached her when we couldn't. As the adults talked around her, Emma withdrew into her private world, communicating with subtle finger movements that sent each dog to its designated position in the room. The officials noticed this silent choreography with growing fascination. Caseworker Rodriguez turned to address Emma directly, using the simplified language she employed with traumatized children. Emma, are you happy living here with your grandparents and the dogs? Emma's eyes, hauntingly like her mother's, met the caseworker's briefly before looking away. No verbal response came. We've scheduled a formal hearing for next Tuesday, Rodriguez finally announced, rising from her seat. A judge will review the situation and determine whether temporary measures are needed while we complete our investigation. She handed Martha a sheaf of documents. This explains your rights and the process moving forward. As the officials departed, they didn't notice Eleanor Peterson's car parked discreetly down the block. Nor did they see her satisfaction as she watched them leave. Finally she whispered to herself, that poor child will get the help she needs. Inside the Thompson home, Martha sank into her chair, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. They'll take her away, Robert, or the dogs. Either way it will destroy her. Robert knelt painfully beside Emma, who sat on the floor surrounded by her canine guardians. Emma, sweetheart, he said gently, we're going to need your help. We need to show these people how special you and the dogs are together. For a moment something flickered in Emma's eyes, a spark of understanding, perhaps even determination. Then she returned to stroking Max's head, her silence more profound than any words she might have spoken. The battle for Emma's future had formally begun, with forces gathering on all sides that would soon collide in ways no one could predict. The investigation into Emma Thompson's situation began on a crisp Monday morning, 7 days before the scheduled hearing. Caseworker Melissa Rodriguez arrived at the Thompson residence accompanied by Dr. Alan Foster, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and autism spectrum disorders. They found Martha Thompson waiting anxiously on the porch, her hands trembling as she offered them coffee from a thermos. Robert's not feeling well this morning, Martha explained, leading them into the living room where Emma sat cross-legged on a worn carpet, surrounded by her 6 German shepherds. His heart, you know. The stress. The dogs shifted position slightly as the visitors entered, maintaining their protective formation around Emma. Dr. Foster noted how Max, the apparent alpha, positioned himself between Emma and the strangers, alert but not aggressive. We'd like to observe Emma's routine with the dogs, Rodriguez explained, setting up a small camera with Martha's reluctant permission. Particularly the morning walk that's generated so much attention. For the next 3 hours the professionals watched as Emma moved through her day, communicating with the dogs through an intricate system of hand signals, subtle vocalizations, with body language. Dr. Foster scribbled notes continuously, particularly interested in how Emma maintained eye contact with the dogs while avoiding it with humans. When it came time for the walk, Martha helped Emma into her jacket, whispering reassurances that the observers would maintain their distance. She won't go if they're too close, Martha explained. The dogs sense her anxiety and become protective. The procession down Main Street had drawn an even larger crowd than usual, word having spread about the impending hearing. Rodriguez noticed how the dogs tightened their formation when strangers approached, creating a living barrier around Emma. Despite the crowd and the observers, Emma executed the walk flawlessly, the dogs responding to her commands with remarkable precision. It's extraordinary, Dr. Foster murmured to Rodriguez. The level of communication, the mutual trust. Breaking this bond could cause significant psychological damage. Rodriguez, trained to remain objective, reminded him, our concern must be her safety and development. Is this relationship healthy or a coping mechanism preventing proper healing and socialization? As they followed at a distance, Eleanor Peterson emerged from the crowd, approaching Rodriguez with purposeful strides. You see it now, don't you? She said, loud enough for nearby onlookers to hear. A child that age cannot possibly control those animals in an emergency. It's an accident waiting to happen. Rodriguez maintained her professional demeanor. We're conducting a thorough assessment, Mrs. Peterson. We appreciate your concern, but I can't discuss our findings at this time. The daily observations continued throughout the week, with additional experts joining the team, a veterinary behaviorist to assess the dogs, an occupational therapist to evaluate Emma's developmental progress, and a social worker specializing in elderly care to address the grandparents' capacity. The Thompson home became a revolving door of professionals, each bringing clipboards, cameras, and specialized assessment tools. Through it all, Emma retreated further into silence, communicating only with her dogs and, occasionally with brief nods to her increasingly frail grandparents. On the 3rd day of observation, an unexpected incident revealed another dimension to the relationship between Emma and her dogs. Robert Thompson, weakened by stress and his heart condition, collapsed in the kitchen while preparing lunch. Before Martha could even cry out, Max, who had been lying near Emma in the living room, suddenly stood at attention, ears forward, and rushed to the kitchen, followed immediately by Emma. By the time Dr. Foster reached the doorway, Emma had already positioned her grandfather in the recovery position, with Max standing guard and the other 5 dogs forming a perimeter. "He does that," Martha explained later after the paramedics had checked Robert and recommended rest. "Max always knows when Robert's about to have an episode. Sometimes before Robert feels it himself." Dr. Foster exchanged glances with Rodriguez. "Seizure detection," he said quietly. "Some dogs have the ability to sense changes in body chemistry preceding seizures or cardiac events. It's well documented but rare." "Max alerted Emma?" Rodriguez asked, clarifying. "No," Martha said, adjusting the blanket around her husband's shoulders. "Max alerted, and Emma understood. They have their own language, those two. Ever since her parents died, it's like she trailed off, emotion overtaken her." The revelation about Max's ability to detect Robert's cardiac events added a new dimension to the case. Rodriguez consulted with her supervisor, who authorized bringing in Samantha Miller, a specialist in service animal assessment. Miller spent an entire day observing Max's behavior around Robert, confirming the dog did indeed display alerting behaviors before Robert's more minor episodes. "This isn't just a pet," Miller explained in her subsequent report. "Max is functioning as an untrained but effective medical alert dog. With proper certification, he could be recognized officially in that capacity." As news of this development spread through Hyannis' informal gossip network, public opinion began shifting. Local medical organizations expressed interest in studying Max's abilities. The Cape Cod Service Dog Association offered to provide formal training to certify Max officially. Even some of Eleanor Peterson's supporters began questioning whether separating Emma from the dogs was in anyone's best interest. Eleanor, however, remained unmoved. "One dog showing useful behavior doesn't justify a child being surrounded by 6 dangerous animals," she insisted to anyone who would listen. "If anything, they should keep the one useful dog and remove the others." The investigation took another turn when Dr. Nathan Jackson, the young veterinarian who had recently joined the practice of Dr. Stanley, requested permission to observe Emma with the dogs from a professional perspective. Tall and somewhat awkward, with wire-rimmed glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, Dr. Jackson had specialized in animal behavior during his training at Cornell. Rodriguez, gathering as many expert opinions as possible before the hearing, agreed to his participation. Unlike the other professionals who maintained careful distance and objectivity, Dr. Jackson approached his observation differently. After watching silently for an hour, he asked Martha's permission to sit on the floor near Emma, though not too close. When granted, he simply sat quietly, occasionally making notes but mostly just observing. After some time, he began mimicking Emma's hand signals when she wasn't looking, studying the subtle variations in her movements. On his 3rd visit, something remarkable happened. Dr. Jackson, still sitting on the floor several feet from Emma, used one of her signals, a slight rotation of the wrist followed by a finger tap. Luna, the smallest of the shepherds, looked at him curiously, then approached and sat before him. Emma turned, startled, and for the first time made direct eye contact with one of the observers. "I hope you don't mind," Dr. Jackson said softly, addressing Emma directly rather than speaking about her to the adults. "I've been studying your language. It's very sophisticated." He demonstrated another signal, and Duke responded by laying down. "Did your parents teach you this?" Emma didn't speak, but she reached for a notebook on the side table and pushed it toward Dr. Jackson. Opening it, he discovered detailed diagrams of hand signals with annotations in adult handwriting, and alongside them simpler versions in what appeared to be a child's hand. "Your parents' training journals," he said, understanding dawning. "You've been studying them and adapting them." Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, the first deliberate communication she had offered to any of the professionals. That evening, Dr. Jackson presented his findings to Rodriguez and the team. "She's not just mimicking her parents' techniques," he explained excitedly. "She's innovating, creating her own variations adapted to her size and the specific personalities of each dog." It's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. But is it safe? Rodriguez pressed, returning to the central question. Safer than most handler-dog relationships I've observed professionally, Dr. Jackson responded without hesitation. These dogs aren't just trained, they're devoted. They see Emma as both leader and charge, something to be both obeyed and protected. His voice took on a passionate quality that surprised his more reserved colleagues. Breaking that bond would be devastating, not just emotionally but developmentally. She's learning responsibility, nonverbal communication, empathy, all through these relationships. As the hearing approached, the investigation team prepared their reports, each bringing their professional perspective to the complex case. Martha and Robert Thompson, despite their anxiety, found hope in the increasing interest and understanding shown by most of the experts. Emma, however, remained largely withdrawn, speaking to no one and increasingly reluctant to perform her usual routines under observation. The night before the hearing, Dr. Jackson made an unscheduled visit to the Thompson home carrying a large folder. "May I speak with you privately?" he asked Martha and Robert, who led him to the kitchen while Emma remained with the dogs in the living room. "I've been reviewing literature on selective mutism and animal-assisted therapy," he explained, spreading articles and research papers across the kitchen table. "There are documented cases where children who wouldn't speak to humans communicated through animals first, eventually transferring those skills to human relationships." He pushed his glasses up his nose, eyes bright with conviction. "I believe Emma's relationship with these dogs could be the bridge back to human connection, not a barrier to it." Robert Thompson's eyes filled with tears. "That's what we've hoped. But we're not professionals. We're just trying to keep what's left of our family together." "I'd like to testify at tomorrow's hearing," Dr. Jackson said firmly, "with your permission." The hearing room at the Barnstable County Courthouse was filled beyond capacity the next morning. Judge Sandra Ostrowski, known for her no-nonsense approach and expertise in family law, surveyed the crowded gallery with a warning glare that immediately quieted the murmurs. At the petitioner's table sat Eleanor Peterson with her attorney, a stern-looking woman from Boston. The respondent's table held Martha and Robert Thompson, represented by James Collins, a local attorney who had offered his services pro bono after learning of their situation. Emma sat between her grandparents, her gaze fixed on her lap, while the dogs remained at home under the supervision of a veterinary technician. Melissa Rodriguez presented the investigation team's findings first, summarizing the various expert assessments with professional detachment. The testimony continued for over an hour, with specialists offering sometimes contradictory opinions about Emma's welfare and development. The judge listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her thorough review of the case files. When Dr. Jackson was called to testify, his demeanor shifted from his usual academic awkwardness to passionate advocacy. He detailed his observations of Emma's communication system, her adaptation of her parents' training techniques, and Max's apparent ability to detect Robert's cardiac events. He cited research studies supporting the therapeutic benefits of human-animal bonds for children with trauma and communication disorders. "In my professional opinion," he concluded, looking directly at the judge, "separating Emma from these dogs would cause profound psychological harm with no countervailing benefit. Instead, I propose a supervised program to build on this extraordinary bond, using it as a foundation for expanded human connection and communication." Eleanor Peterson's attorney cross-examined Dr. Jackson aggressively, questioning his experience, objectivity, and the scientific basis for his conclusions. Throughout, Eleanor sat ramrod straight, occasionally nodding in approval at particularly pointed questions. When her turn to testify came, she presented herself as a concerned citizen with decades of experience in child development through her career in education. "I have nothing but compassion for the Thompson family," she stated, her voice carrying the authority of her former position. "But compassion must not blind us to danger. 6 powerful animals, capable of inflicting serious injury, controlled by a traumatized child who does not speak. This is not a stable situation." She outlined her concerns methodically, presenting printed photographs of German Shepherd attacks collected from internet searches. Prevention is our responsibility. Must we wait for tragedy before acting? As the hearing stretched into its fourth hour, Judge Ostrowski called a brief recess. In the hallway, reporters clustered around the participants while supporters from both sides exchanged tense looks. Robert Thompson sat heavily on a bench, Martha rubbing his arm soothingly while monitoring his color with worried eyes. When court resumed, the judge announced she would hear final statements before rendering her decision. The attorneys presented their closing arguments, the Thompsons' lawyer emphasizing family preservation and the unique therapeutic relationship, while Peterson's counsel stressed safety concerns and the developmental implications of Emma's isolation with the dogs. Before I make my ruling, Judge Ostrowski said, I would like to hear from Emma Thompson, if she wishes to speak. A murmur ran through the courtroom, as everyone present knew the child had not spoken publicly since her parents' death. Martha leaned down to whisper to Emma, who shook her head slightly, eyes still downcast. The judge nodded understandingly. Very well. Based on the testimony presented today, I am prepared to render a preliminary decision pending further. A disturbance at the back of the courtroom interrupted her. The doors burst open and Max, having somehow escaped from the Thompson home, bounded down the center aisle. Behind him followed the veterinary technician, apologizing breathlessly as she tried to catch up. The courtroom erupted in gasps and exclamations as the massive German Shepherd made his way directly to Emma, ignoring the bailiff who moved to intercept him. This unexpected development would prove to be a turning point that no one could have anticipated, setting the stage for revelations that would transform not just Emma's situation, but the entire community's understanding of her extraordinary bond with her dogs. The courtroom froze in collective shock as Max made his way directly to Emma. Judge Ostrowski, known throughout Barnstable County for her strict adherence to protocol, found herself momentarily speechless. The bailiff hesitated, hand moving toward his holster in automatic response to the large animal's presence. Dr. Jackson quickly stood, holding up a reassuring hand toward the officer. He's not aggressive, he stated firmly. Please don't make any sudden movements. Max reached Emma, who placed her small hand on his head in a calming gesture. The dog's intelligent eyes scanned the room before settling on Robert Thompson, whose face had grown alarmingly pale during the proceedings. With a low whine, Max turned from Emma and approached her grandfather, nudging his knee insistently. Dr. Jackson moved forward. Mr. Thompson, are you feeling unwell? Max may be alerting. Robert waved dismissively, though his breathing appeared labored. I'm fine, just the stress. Your Honor, Dr. Jackson addressed the judge, this may be precisely the medical alert behavior we discussed in testimony. Max is indicating Mr. Thompson may be experiencing cardiac distress. Judge Ostrowski, recovering her composure, nodded to the bailiff. All for medical assistance, please. She directed her attention to the gallery. Court will take a 15-minute recess. Everyone except the immediate parties and medical personnel, please clear the courtroom. As the spectators reluctantly filed out, buzzing with excitement at the dramatic turn of events, paramedics arrived to examine Robert. But they confirmed elevated blood pressure and irregular heart rhythm, requiring further evaluation at the hospital. Throughout their assessment, Max remained vigilant, occasionally returning to Emma as if providing updates before resuming his post beside Robert. The dog was right, one paramedic remarked, securing Robert to a transport chair. If he'd gone untreated, this could have escalated to a serious cardiac event. Martha, torn between accompanying her husband and remaining with Emma, looked desperately at Melissa Rodriguez. I can't leave Emma alone, but Robert needs me. Before Rodriguez could respond, Dr. Jackson stepped forward. I'd be willing to stay with Emma, if that would help. And perhaps Max should accompany Mr. Thompson. His alerting could prove valuable to the medical team. Judge Ostrowski, who had been observing the scene with keen interest, made an unprecedented decision. Mrs. Thompson, would your granddaughter be comfortable remaining in my chambers with Dr. Jackson while we sort this out? I promise no decisions will be made in your absence. Martha looked questioningly at Emma, who gave a barely perceptible nod. As Robert was wheeled out with Max at his side and Martha following anxiously behind, Judge Ostrowski led Emma and Dr. Jackson to her private chambers. The remaining courtroom participants, including Eleanor Peterson and the attorneys, were instructed to return in 1 hour. In the judge's chambers, Emma sat rigidly in an oversized leather chair, eyes fixed on the floor. Dr. Jackson, maintaining a respectful distance, spoke softly about the dogs, describing his own childhood German Shepherd, and asking gentle questions that required no verbal response. Judge Ostrowski, observing from behind her desk, noted the careful, non-threatening approach. After nearly 20 minutes of one-sided conversation, Dr. Jackson reached into his pocket and produced several photographs. I took these during my visits, he explained, placing them on the coffee table where Emma could see them. You've trained them beautifully. Your parents would be very proud. Emma's eyes flickered to the images, candid shots of her with the dogs during their training sessions. For the first time, she seemed to register genuine interest in something beyond her immediate concern for her grandfather. Her small fingers reached out to touch a photograph of Max standing protectively beside her. He's extraordinary, Dr. Jackson continued. They all are. But I think you're the most extraordinary part of the equation. The communication you've developed, the trust you've built, it's remarkable. Judge Ostrowski, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Emma, I know this is difficult. Everyone talking about you, making decisions about your life. I imagine it feels like no one is really listening to what you want. She moved from behind her desk and sat in an adjacent chair, careful not to crowd the child. I'd like to listen, if you're willing to tell me. It doesn't have to be with words if that's too hard right now. Emma lifted her eyes briefly to the judge's face, then returned her gaze to the photographs. After a long moment, she pointed to the image of all 6 dogs surrounding her on the living room floor. Your family, Judge Ostrowski interpreted, and Emma nodded. Dr. Jackson retrieved a notepad from his briefcase. Would you like to write what you're thinking? He offered, or draw it, perhaps. Emma accepted the pad and pen, bending over it in concentration. For several minutes, the only sound in the chamber was the soft scratching of pen on paper. When she finally turned the pad around, both adults were startled to see not a child's drawing but a carefully written sentence in neat printing. Please don't take my dogs away. They keep the nightmares from coming back. Dr. Jackson blinked in surprise. Emma, you can write very well. Emma took the pad back and wrote another line. I can read too. Mom and Dad taught me early. Why don't you speak? Judge Ostrowski asked gently. Is it because it hurts too much? Emma considered this, then wrote, words got stuck after I saw the accident. I try but they won't come out. It scares Grandma and Grandpa when I try too hard. This written dialogue continued, with Emma revealing more about her understanding of the situation than anyone had suspected. She expressed awareness of the community's concerns, acknowledged her grandparents' struggles, and demonstrated a sophistication of thought that belied her 6 years. Most significantly, she articulated the central role the dogs played in her emotional survival after witnessing her parents' deaths. The dogs still hear Mom and Dad in my hands, she wrote, a poetic expression of her belief that the training techniques connected her to her parents. As the hour drew to a close, Judge Ostrowski faced a decision. We need to return to the courtroom soon, she explained to Emma. Based on what you've shared, I believe I understand your wishes better. But Emma, the court needs to hear your voice, not necessarily in words, but in some way that everyone can understand. Emma stared at the notepad for a long moment, then wrote, Will Max come back? I'll make sure of it, Dr. Jackson promised. When court reconvened, Martha Thompson had returned, reporting that Robert was stabilized and undergoing tests. Max had indeed proven valuable to the medical team, alerting to another irregularity that prompted preventative treatment. At Judge Ostrowski's direction, the German Shepherd now lay at Emma's feet beneath the respondent's table, his presence both a comfort to the child and a living demonstration of the bond at issue. Before I hear final arguments, Judge Ostrowski announced, I'd like to address some additional information that has come to light during our recess. She explained her conversation with Emma, emphasizing the child's ability to communicate through writing and her clear expression of her wishes regarding the dogs. Eleanor Peterson's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, ex parte communications with a minor child without counsel present are highly irregular. We request these statements be stricken from consideration. Judge Ostrowski fixed the attorney with a stern gaze. Counselor, this court's primary obligation is to determine what serves the best interest of the child. I will consider all relevant information, particularly the expressed wishes of the child herself, when she has found a means to communicate them. The attorney persisted. The child is traumatized and clearly emotionally dependent on these animals. She cannot objectively assess what's in her own best interest. At this statement, something shifted in the courtroom atmosphere. Emma, who had been sitting motionless beside her grandmother, suddenly straightened. Her hand moved to Max's head in what appeared to be a signal. The dog stood quietly as Emma slid from her chair to stand beside him. Martha reached for her granddaughter. Emma, honey, you don't have to. But Emma had already taken a step forward, her small hand resting on Max's back as if drawing strength from his solid presence. The courtroom fell silent, all eyes fixed on the tiny figure who had become the center of such community division. Emma looked up, her gaze moving uncertainly across the unfamiliar adults until it settled on Judge Ostrowski's face. The dogs, Emma began, her voice so soft it was barely audible, they're not just pets. The sound seemed to startle even Emma herself. She swallowed hard, visibly struggling. Max pressed closer to her side and she drew a deep breath. They keep me safe, she continued, each word forming with tremendous effort but growing marginally stronger. When the car hit Mom and Dad, I was in the back seat. Max pulled me out before the fire. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. This detail, that Emma had been present at her parents' fatal accident and rescued by one of the dogs, had never been mentioned in any of the investigation reports or previous testimony. Martha Thompson covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She never told us, she whispered to Rodriguez. We thought she was with the babysitter when it happened. The police just said she was found at the scene, unharmed. Emma continued, the words coming haltingly but with increasing determination. Max saved me then. All the dogs save me every day. From the dreams. From the pictures in my head, her voice broke slightly. Please don't take them away. They're the only part of Mom and Dad I have left. The courtroom remained absolutely silent as Emma turned and walked back to her chair, Max matching her pace exactly. Martha embraced her granddaughter, sobbing quietly, while Emma herself remained dry-eyed, as if the tremendous effort of speaking had left no energy for tears. Judge Ostrowski, visibly moved but maintaining her judicial composure, addressed the court. I think we've heard the most important testimony in this case. Ms. Peterson, would you like to respond? Eleanor Peterson, whose rigid posture had gradually softened during Emma's statement, slowly rose to her feet. For perhaps the first time since the proceedings began, she looked at Emma directly, not as a subject of concern but as a person deserving of respect. Your Honor, she began, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain, I initiated this action because I believed the child was in danger. I still believe that proper safeguards must be in place. She paused, seeming to struggle with an internal conflict. However, I cannot in good conscience continue to advocate for removing these animals from Emma's life, not after what we've just witnessed. Her attorney tugged at her sleeve in obvious dismay, but Eleanor continued. I would like to withdraw my petition, but the request that the court consider ordering some form of professional oversight to ensure ongoing safety and to support Emma's continued recovery. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Ms. Peterson. I appreciate your willingness to reconsider your position. She turned to address the entire courtroom. Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the evidence presented today, I am prepared to issue my ruling. Judge Ostrowski delivered her decision with careful precision, acknowledging the legitimate concerns raised while affirming the unique bond between Emma and her dogs. She ordered a 6-month monitoring period with regular visits from both child welfare services and animal behavior specialists, with Dr. Jackson specifically appointed to develop a therapeutic program building on Emma's communication abilities. Most significantly, she ruled that the dogs could remain with Emma, provided certain safety protocols were implemented and the grandparents received additional support services. This court recognizes that there are no perfect solutions in cases involving childhood trauma, she concluded. But when a child finds a path toward healing, however unconventional, our responsibility is to nurture that path while ensuring appropriate safeguards. That is what I have attempted to do today. As the hearing adjourned, the courtroom buzzed with conversation. Reporters rushed to file their stories, while spectators debated the judge's decision. Through it all, Emma remained beside her grandmother, one hand on Max's head, seemingly untouched by the commotion around her. Having found her voice after 2 years of silence, she had retreated once again into quietude, but it was a different quality of silence now, one of choice rather than trauma. Then punctuated by the occasional whispered word to the dog who had twice saved her life. The day after the hearing brought clear skies and a palpable sense of relief to the Thompson household. For the first time in weeks, Emma completed her morning routine without observers, walking her dogs through town with renewed confidence. Townspeople stopped to congratulate her on the judge's decision, though Emma still responded primarily with nods rather than words. Martha later reported to Melissa Rodriguez that Emma had spoken a few sentences at home, brief, halting communications about practical matters, but progress nonetheless. It's as if breaking that barrier in court opened a door, Martha explained during Rodriguez's first monitoring visit. She's not chatty by any means, but the words don't seem to frighten her quite as much now. The media attention gradually diminished as newer stories captured the public's imagination. Eleanor Peterson, surprisingly, maintained a dignified silence, declining all interview requests and withdrawing from her usual community activities. Neighbors reported seeing lights in her Victorian home at odd hours, but she rarely ventured out except for essential errands. Her husband mentioned to his golfing partners that Eleanor was reassessing some things but offered no further explanation. 2 weeks after the hearing, Dr. Jackson began implementing the therapeutic program ordered by the court. 3 times weekly he visited the Thompson home to work with Emma and the dogs, documenting their progress and gradually introducing structured activities designed to expand Emma's communication skills beyond her canine companions. Robert, recovering from his cardiac incident but still weak, watched these sessions from his armchair, and occasionally offering suggestions based on his memories of his son's training techniques. On an unseasonably warm Thursday in early June, Dr. Jackson suggested taking the therapy session outdoors to the public garden near the harbor. A controlled change of environment might help us assess how Emma and the dogs respond to different conditions, he explained to Martha. Plus, I think you could all use some sunshine. The session proceeded smoothly, with Emma directing the dogs through various exercises while answering Dr. Jackson's simple questions with one-word responses or nods. They attracted some attention from tourists, but the doctor skillfully managed the interactions, explaining just enough to satisfy curiosity while protecting Emma from intrusive questions. As they prepared to return home, Emma suddenly tensed, her hand tightening on Max's fur. Following her gaze, Dr. Jackson spotted Eleanor Peterson standing motionless on the garden path, clutching a shopping bag and staring at them with an unreadable expression. Before he could intervene, Eleanor approached, her normally perfect posture slightly stooped, as if bearing an invisible weight. Emma, she said softly, stopping at a respectful distance. I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment. Her eyes flickered to Dr. Jackson, with proper supervision, of course. Dr. Jackson looked to Emma, who had drawn the dogs closer but showed no signs of acute distress. It's your choice, Emma, he reminded her. You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to. To his surprise, Emma gave a slight nod, though she positioned Max between herself and Eleanor. Taking this as permission, Eleanor took a tentative step forward. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong to try to separate you from your dogs." She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. "The truth is, I have a more personal reason to speak with you, one I've been too ashamed to acknowledge until now." Dr. Jackson tensed, alert to any sign of distress from Emma. "Mrs. Peterson, perhaps this isn't the appropriate—" "I was there," Eleanor interrupted, the words tumbling out as if she couldn't contain them any longer. "The night your parents died, it was my car that ran the red light." The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma's eyes widened, her body going absolutely still. The dogs, sensing her shock, shifted positions subtly, forming a tighter barrier around her. "It was raining so hard," Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was distracted, arguing with my husband on the phone. I didn't see the light change. By the time I saw your parents' car, it was too late." Tears streamed unchecked down her lined face. "The police said it was an accident, poor visibility, bad weather conditions. No charges were filed, but I knew. I've known every day since." Dr. Jackson moved protectively toward Emma, but she surprised him by placing a restraining hand on his arm. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes remained fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. "When I saw you with those dogs," Eleanor continued, "walking past my house every morning, it was like being haunted. The guilt I'd managed to contain came flooding back. I convinced myself you weren't safe, that the dogs were dangerous, anything to justify interfering. To feel like I was doing something good to balance the terrible thing I'd done." Her voice broke. "But watching you in court, hearing you speak for the first time, I realized I wasn't protecting you. I was trying to protect myself from my own guilt." Emma's silence stretched so long that Dr. Jackson began to worry about her psychological state. He was about to suggest returning home when she finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "You hurt my mom and dad." Eleanor nodded, tears falling faster now. "Yes, and I can never undo that harm. I understand if you hate me." "The dogs recognized your smell," Emma interrupted, a revelation that startled both adults. "That's why they always got nervous when we walked past your house. They remembered from the accident." This previously unknown detail, that the dogs had recognized Eleanor's scent from the crash scene, landed with devastating impact. Eleanor seemed to physically shrink before their eyes, her shoulders curving inward as if to protect her heart from this final confirmation of her responsibility. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I've wanted to tell you for so long, but cowardice kept me silent. I don't expect forgiveness." Whatever Eleanor intended to say next was cut short by a sudden commotion. A cyclist sped around the corner of the garden path, startling a group of pigeons into flight. The unexpected movement and noise came from directly behind Emma, causing her to jump in alarm. Max, interpreting this as a threat, immediately moved to intercept, placing himself between Emma and the perceived danger. In that split second of confusion, Eleanor instinctively stepped forward, perhaps to steady herself or to reach for Emma. Max, already on high alert, and now confronted with the person his animal senses associated with danger to his family, reacted with protective instinct. He lunged forward with a warning bark, not attacking but clearly defending his position. Eleanor, startled by the dog's sudden movement, lost her balance and fell backward onto the paved path. Dr. Jackson rushed to intervene, calling a command to Max that Emma had taught him during their sessions. The dog immediately backed down, returning to Emma's side, but the damage was done. Eleanor lay on the ground, clutching her arm and breathing heavily. "Are you injured, Mrs. Peterson?" Dr. Jackson knelt beside her, quickly assessing for signs of trauma. "My arm," Eleanor gasped. "I think I may have broken it in the fall." She looked past Dr. Jackson to where Emma stood with the dogs, now perfectly controlled despite the disturbance. The dog, he didn't actually bite me. He was protecting her, I just lost my balance. Despite Eleanor's clarification, the incident attracted immediate attention. A park visitor called 911 reporting a dog attack. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived, creating exactly the kind of scene that Judge Ostrowski's careful ruling had sought to prevent. As Eleanor was placed on a stretcher, still insisting that Max had not attacked her, Officer Connolly approached Emma with obvious reluctance. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said gently, "but I'll need to take Max to animal control until this incident can be properly investigated. It's standard procedure when there's an injury involved, even if it wasn't a direct bite." Emma's face crumpled in distress, her newfound voice deserting her completely as she clung to Max's fur. Dr. Jackson tried to intervene, explaining the circumstances and Eleanor's own statement that the dog had not attacked, but the officer regretfully shook his head. "I don't have a choice here, Doc. There are protocols we have to follow. We'll make sure he's well cared for, and you can come visit him at the facility until this gets sorted out." As Officer Connolly carefully attached a lead to Max's collar, Emma suddenly found her voice. "No," she cried, the single word carrying all the anguish of a child facing another devastating loss. "Please, he was just protecting me. Don't take him." The officer paused, visibly torn between protocol and compassion. "I'm sorry, Emma. It's just temporary, I promise. We'll get this straightened out." Or from her stretcher, Eleanor made a weak attempt to intervene. "It wasn't the dog's fault," she insisted to the paramedics. "Please note that in your report, I fell. The dog was protecting the child as he should." Despite these protests, protocol prevailed. As Max was led reluctantly toward the animal control vehicle, Emma collapsed into Dr. Jackson's arms, sobbing with an abandon that broke the hearts of everyone present. The remaining 5 shepherds gathered around her, whining in distress at their packmate's removal and their young handler's obvious anguish. The incident at the public garden would become the darkest moment in Emma's journey, a cruel twist that threatened to undo all the progress she had made. Yet within this apparent tragedy lay the seeds of an unexpected reversal that would transform not only Emma's life but the entire community's understanding of loyalty, forgiveness, and healing. The following morning found Emma Thompson sitting motionless on the front porch of her grandparents' home, surrounded by her 5 remaining German shepherds. She had not spoken since Max's removal, reverting to the silence that had characterized the months after her parents' death. Martha made repeated attempts to comfort her granddaughter, bringing favorite foods that remained untouched, offering reassurances that fell on deaf ears. Robert, against doctor's orders, placed phone calls to every official he could reach, seeking intervention in what he described as a grave miscarriage of justice. Dr. Jackson arrived early, having spent the previous evening at the animal control facility ensuring Max received proper care. The dog had remained calm but alert, showing none of the aggression that might justify extended quarantine. "He's being well treated," Dr. Jackson assured Emma, crouching to meet her downcast eyes. "And Officer Connolly is expediting the review process." The promised expedited review arrived in the form of Melissa Rodriguez, who pulled into the Thompson driveway shortly before noon. She carried a tablet and wore the serious expression of a professional bearing difficult news. "We have a situation," she explained after Martha invited her inside. "Mrs. Peterson has been released from the hospital with a fractured wrist. While she continues to insist that the dog didn't attack her directly, the incident has triggered a mandatory safety review under the terms of Judge Ostrowski's order." Robert slammed his palm against the kitchen table. "That woman caused this entire situation. From the accident that killed our son to this latest incident, it's all her doing." Mr. Thompson, Rodriguez cautioned, "Emotional responses won't help Emma now. We need to focus on the legal parameters and how best to navigate them." She turned to Dr. Jackson. "You were present throughout the incident. I need your detailed account for my report." As the adults conferred in the kitchen, Emma remained on the porch, seemingly disconnected from the crisis unfolding around her. Only Duke, The most intuitive of the remaining shepherds after Max seemed able to draw any response from her, occasionally earning a gentle stroke when he placed his head in her lap. The impromptu strategy session was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Michael Gallagher, the tattooed restaurant owner who had spoken in Emma's defense at the town meeting months earlier. "Sorry to barge in," he said, standing awkwardly in the kitchen doorway, "but I think you all need to see something." He held up a small USB drive. "My restaurant installed security cameras last year, part of the harbor revitalization project. They cover the waterfront and part of the public garden." He glanced toward the porch where Emma sat. "After yesterday's incident, I reviewed our footage from the past few months. There's something from about 8 weeks ago that you need to see." Martha led the group to the living room, where Robert's ancient desktop computer wheezed to life. Michael inserted the drive and navigated to a video file dated 6 weeks before the courthouse hearing. "This was a Tuesday morning," he explained. "My staff noted that Emma didn't pass by the restaurant for her usual walk. We were concerned, so I checked the cameras later that day but didn't see anything significant. I didn't look carefully enough until now." The footage, though grainy, clearly showed the public garden from an elevated angle. The timestamp indicated 5:47 a.m., earlier than Emma's usual walking time. The screen showed Emma entering the frame, alone except for Max. She moved toward the small decorative pond at the garden center, kneeling at its edge to examine something in the water. "The pond was being cleaned that week," Michael explained. "They drained it halfway for maintenance, but they left the pump running." On screen, Emma leaned precariously over the concrete edge, reaching for what appeared to be a toy boat stuck near the center. Without warning, she slipped, tumbling headfirst into the partially drained pond. The camera captured her desperate thrashing, clearly struggling in water that, while not deep, posed a significant danger to a small child unable to regain her footing on the slippery surface. Max reacted instantly. Without hesitation, the dog leaped into the water, maneuvering his body beneath Emma's to push her toward the surface. After several tense seconds, he managed to guide her to the pond's edge, using his powerful body to boost her onto the concrete rim. Emma collapsed at the pond's edge, coughing violently, while Max pulled himself out beside her, shaking water from his coat before nudging her repeatedly until she sat up. The footage showed Emma embracing the dog, visibly shaken but apparently uninjured. After several minutes, she stood unsteadily and made her way out of the garden, leaning against Max for support. No other witnesses appeared in the frame. When the video ended, silence filled the Thompson living room. Martha pressed her trembling fingers to her lips. "She never told us," she whispered. "She came home with wet clothes that morning but said she'd slipped in a puddle. If Max hadn't been there." Dr. Jackson studied the frozen final frame of the video. "This confirms what I've observed in their relationship. Max doesn't just obey Emma, he's actively protective of her, making independent decisions when necessary for her safety." Rodriguez tapped notes into her tablet with renewed purpose. "This footage provides critical context for yesterday's incident. Max's reaction to Mrs. Peterson can be clearly characterized as protective rather than aggressive, consistent with a documented pattern of behavior." She looked up. "Mr. Gallagher, would you be willing to provide this footage for the official review?" "Already made copies," Michael replied, handing her a duplicate drive. "And I'm happy to testify if needed. That dog's a hero, plain and simple." Within hours, the existence of the video spread through Hyannisy Fish and Gossip Network. The community members who had remained neutral during the initial controversy now expressed outrage at Max's continued detention. By mid-afternoon, the small crowd had gathered outside the animal control facility, carrying hastily made signs reading "Free Max" and "Heroes Don't Belong in Cages." The morning's developments took an even more dramatic turn when Eleanor Peterson herself arrived at the Thompson home, her arm in a cast and her expression resolute despite obvious pain. This time she bypassed the house entirely, making her way directly to where Emma still sat on the porch, surrounded by her protective canine entourage. "Emma," she said softly, maintaining a respectful distance. I've just learned about the pond incident, about how Max saved you." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "I've done something terrible, worse than you know. The accident that took your parents wasn't entirely as I described yesterday." Emma looked up, her expression guarded but attentive as Eleanor continued. "But I told you I was distracted by arguing with my husband." It was true. But she swallowed hard. "I'd had 2 glasses of wine at lunch, not enough to be legally impaired, according to the blood test, but enough that I shouldn't have been driving in poor weather conditions. The police knew, but they were lenient given my position in the community and my previously clean record." Eleanor's confession, delivered in a voice loud enough to be heard by the adults now standing in the doorway, landed like a physical blow. Martha gasped audibly, while Robert's face darkened with renewed anger. "I've lived with this secret for 2 years, Eleanor continued, tears streaming down her lined face, "using my influence to bury the complete truth, convincing myself it was better for everyone. Then when I saw you with those dogs that might recognize me, might somehow expose what I'd done, I panicked. I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was protecting myself." She reached into her purse with her uninjured hand, withdrawing an envelope. "I've just come from the police station where I gave a complete statement correcting the record. I've also submitted my resignation from all community positions." She placed the envelope on the porch step. "This is a formal letter taking full responsibility for yesterday's incident and explicitly stating that Max acted appropriately as a protective service animal. My attorney has already submitted it to Animal Control and Judge Ostrowski's office." Emma studied Eleanor's face for a long moment before finally speaking, her voice small but clear. "Why now?" "But—" Eleanor's shoulders sagged under the weight of the question. "Because watching that security footage, seeing how Max risked himself to save you without hesitation, made me realize how badly I failed to take responsibility for my actions. That dog has shown more courage and integrity than I have." She wiped at her tears with her good hand. "I can't bring your parents back. I can't undo the harm I've caused. But I can at least try to ensure you don't lose someone else you love because of my actions." As if summoned by these words, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Officer Connolly emerged, followed by a familiar figure, Max, alert and eager, straining at his leash. "Special delivery," the officer called out, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Mrs. Peterson's statement fast-tracked the review process. "Max has been officially cleared of any wrongdoing and is classified as a service animal under the court order." What happened next would be recounted throughout Hyannis for years to come. Emma, silent and withdrawn just moments before, let out a cry of pure joy and raced down the porch steps. Max, seeing his young handler approaching, sat obediently until Officer Connolly released his leash. Then dog and child collided in a reunion of unbridled emotion, Max's tail whipping the air as Emma buried her face in his fur, whispering words only he could hear. Eleanor Peterson watched the scene with tears streaming down her face, tears not of self-pity but of a more complex emotion. Regret mingled with the first tentative hope of redemption. In her broken admission of guilt and subsequent actions, she had unwittingly opened a path toward healing, not just for Emma but potentially for herself as well. The truth so long concealed now stood revealed in the harsh light of day, painful but ultimately liberating for all involved. The summer following Max's brief detention brought transformative changes to Hyannis and to Emma Thompson's world. Judge Ostrowski amended her original order, that formally recognizing Max as a service animal and establishing legal precedent that would benefit other families with similar needs throughout Massachusetts. The classification extended to Emma's entire pack, acknowledging their collective role in her emotional recovery while maintaining reasonable safety protocols. Eleanor Peterson's public confession sent ripples through the community. Some residents, particularly those who had supported her campaign against Emma's dogs, expressed feelings of betrayal. Others recognized the courage required to admit such a devastating mistake and commended her belated honesty. The district attorney reviewed the case but ultimately decided against pursuing criminal charges, they citing the statute of limitations on the lesser offenses and insufficient evidence for more serious counts. Nevertheless, Eleanor voluntarily surrendered her driver's license and began attending weekly addiction counseling sessions at the community center. Perhaps most surprisingly, Eleanor initiated a civil settlement with the Thompson family, establishing a trust fund for Emma's education and future needs. In that, Martha and Robert initially resisted, viewing the money as blood payment for their son's life, but ultimately accepted after Eleanor structured the trust to include ongoing support for the dog's care and training. "We cannot change the past," Martha told Robert during one of their late-night discussions on the subject. "But we can secure Emma's future. That's what Mark and Sarah would have wanted." The most remarkable development, however, came from Dr. Nathan Jackson's continued work with Emma and her dogs. Building on the communication techniques he had observed, he developed a structured program combining animal-assisted therapy with traditional counseling approaches. Emma served as both patient and collaborator, her unique bond with the dogs providing insights that helped refine the methodology. "What we're seeing with Emma isn't just a child with well-trained pets," Dr. Jackson explained to a gathering of mental health professionals at Cape Cod Hospital's Behavioral Health Symposium. "She's created a sophisticated communication system that bridges human and canine understanding, allowing for complex collaborative behaviors. More importantly, this system has provided her with emotional security during profound trauma, effectively preventing more severe developmental impacts." By September, word of Emma's progress had spread through professional networks, attracting interest from researchers at Tufts University's Center for Animals and Public Policy. After careful consideration and extensive preparation to ensure Emma's comfort, Martha and Robert agreed to allow a limited research study documenting the therapeutic benefits of Emma's bond with her dogs. The resulting paper, co-authored by Dr. Jackson, would eventually be published in a prestigious journal with Emma credited as a juvenile contributor. Emma herself continued to emerge from her protective silence, speaking more frequently, though still primarily with family members and Dr. Jackson. Her vocabulary advanced for her age due to early reading, sometimes startled adults unprepared for philosophical observations delivered in a child's voice. "The dogs don't need me to talk," she explained to Dr. Jackson during one session. "They understand anyway. But people need words to understand feelings." When public school resumed in the fall, the Thompsons faced another difficult decision. Traditional classroom settings presented obvious challenges for a child still recovering from trauma and accustomed to canine rather than human companionship. After extensive consultation with educators and therapists, they arranged a modified attendance plan, allowing Emma to participate in morning classes while continuing her therapy sessions in the afternoons. The school administration initially balked at Emma's request to bring Max as a service animal, citing potential disruption and allergy concerns. Once again, the community that had been so divided months earlier came together in support. Parents signed petitions, the school committee held a special meeting, and eventually a compromise emerged. Max would accompany Emma during her transition to school, gradually reducing his presence as she became more comfortable. On her first day of first grade, Emma walked into Barnstable Elementary holding tightly to Max's service vest with one hand and Martha's fingers with the other. Students had been prepared for their unique classmate, but children's natural curiosity still resulted in a flurry of questions that might have overwhelmed Emma just months earlier. Instead, she found her voice, quietly explaining Max's role while the German Shepherd sat perfectly behaved beside her desk. "He helps me remember to breathe when I get scared," she told her classmates with simple honesty. "And he reminds me that I'm safe now." By winter, Emma had progressed to attending school full days 3 times weekly, with Max waiting in the counselor's office rather than remaining in the classroom. Her academic performance, initially a concern given her irregular early education, proved exceptional, particularly in reading and natural sciences. Her social integration proceeded more gradually, but by the holiday concert in December, she had formed tentative friendships with 2 classmates who shared her interest in animals. Eleanor Peterson's redemption arc progressed in parallel with Emma's recovery. After her initial confession, she withdrew from public life, selling her Victorian home and moving to a modest apartment near the community center, where she began volunteer work. Many expected her to leave Hyannis entirely, but Eleanor chose to remain, bearing the weight of community judgment as part of her self-imposed penance. The true turning point in Eleanor's relationship with the Thompson family came unexpectedly during a winter storm that caused extended power outages throughout Cape Cod. With temperatures dropping dangerously and Robert's health a constant concern, the Emergency Management Office established warming centers for vulnerable residents. Martha, attempting to transport Robert, Emma, and 6 large dogs to the designated shelter, found herself stranded when their aging station wagon refused to start in the bitter cold. It was Eleanor who answered their call for assistance, arriving with a rented SUV large enough to accommodate the entire Thompson household, including the dogs. During the 3 days they shared at the community shelter, the tentative foundations of forgiveness began to form, not the easy absolution of greeting cards, but the hard-earned reconciliation that acknowledges harm while creating space for healing. By spring, Dr. Jackson's therapeutic program had expanded to include other children struggling with trauma and communication difficulties. With the Thompsons' permission, he established the Pause for Communication program, utilizing a training facility donated by a local business owner impressed by Emma's story. Max and his packmates served as the program's canine pioneers, demonstrating the techniques Emma had developed and refined. Emma herself, once the silent subject of community concern, gradually stepped into the role of junior instructor. Under careful supervision, she began helping other children establish connections with specially trained therapy dogs. Her soft voice, still hesitant at times, carried special authority when explaining canine communication to children who, like her former self, struggled to find words for their feelings. "Dogs understand what's in your heart," she told a 7-year-old boy who hadn't spoken since witnessing domestic violence in his home. "They don't need you to use the right words. They just need you to be honest." The boy, who had remained unresponsive to traditional therapy for months, reached tentatively toward the German Shepherd puppy Emma had selected for him. His first smile in nearly a year followed soon after. On the anniversary of the court hearing that had nearly separated Emma from her dogs, Mayor Williams declared Canine Companionship Day in Hyannis, featuring a community celebration in the same public garden where Max had once rescued Emma from drowning. The ceremony included the unveiling of a small bronze plaque commemorating the event and recognizing the therapeutic program that had grown from it. As Emma stood beside the plaque, surrounded by her 6 German shepherds and flanked by her grandparents, Dr. Jackson, and in a development few could have predicted, Eleanor Peterson, Mayor Williams presented her with a certificate of appreciation for her contributions to the community. When invited to speak, Emma stepped forward without hesitation, Max at her side maintaining a watchful but relaxed presence. "My parents taught me that dogs and people are meant to help each other," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I think they'd be happy to see how many people are being helped now." She glanced at her furry companions, a smile transforming her solemn face into that of any ordinary 7-year-old experiencing a moment of pure joy. The dogs already knew that all along. Sometimes we just need them to remind us. As the crowd applauded, Martha Thompson embraced her granddaughter, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your parents would be so proud," she whispered. Emma nodded, reaching down to stroke Max's head with the quiet confidence of a child who had found her way through darkness into light, but guided by the unwavering loyalty of 6 remarkable dogs and the community that had ultimately rallied to protect them all. In the twilight of our years, we often reflect on what truly matters. Emma's story reminds us that healing comes in unexpected forms, and that it's never too late for redemption or second chances. Like Eleanor, many of us carry regrets that seem too heavy to bear, mistakes we believe define us. Yet our courage to finally face the truth offers a powerful lesson. Acknowledgement of our failings can be the first step toward healing, both for ourselves and those we've harmed. The bonds between Emma and her dogs mirror the connections we cherish with those who stand by us unconditionally. They remind us that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who guide us through our darkest moments without judgment. As we face our own challenges of aging, let us remember that wisdom comes not from avoiding life's storms, but from learning to dance in the rain, sometimes with companions who speak no words but understand our hearts completely. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.